In this video, we're going to talk about stakeholders. A stakeholder is a person, organization, institution that has a vested interest in an issue because they have something at stake, by which I mean they have something to gain or to lose. You're going to use this idea to come up with your audience for your A2 paper, which is an argument paper. So you're going to use the idea of having a stake, having a vested interest in order to pick a stakeholder audience. So you're going to pick a person, institution, group, organization that you think has something pretty serious to gain or lose um, based on your topic. And then you're going to make an argument and try to convince them of your argument. You're not really going to be doing this yet because we haven't even brainstormed topics. First, we're going to do that. Then you're going to develop an inquiry question. You're going to pick a topic, develop a question, start researching that question, and eventually you're going to settle on an audience and a thesis. So don't worry about picking a specific audience right now, but it is helpful to build the skill of noticing who is a stakeholder and figuring out what their stake is in a given situation. I've found that a good way to do this is to use a specific example. So I've created an example that's relevant to our current situation at CSU. Last semester and this semester, the university has had to decide whether to hold classes remotely or in person or some combination. And as you know, this semester they've decided on some combination. But let's imagine they're deciding whether to go fully remote for a semester. And so if you were thinking maybe they'll go fully remote, I want you to think about who are the stakeholders? Who in this situation has something to gain or lose or both? Why would they care? What is their stake? And so I want to go through a few possible stakeholders here. And this is a process I want you to follow along with and then work on yourself when we cover new topics that might interest you. So current students, that's a main stakeholder like you. Let's say they were considering going remote. Students stand potentially to lose something because many students feel that the quality of the instruction and the value of the college experience is diminished when we're remote only. And so they have something potentially to lose, but they're kind of a complicated stakeholder because they also potentially have something to gain. There are vulnerable students who may themselves be worried about risk. And if we go remote, maybe they feel more comfortable. Also, there are plenty of students who have family members who are higher risk. And if they come study in person, then maybe they go home over a break or at the end of the semester and increase the risk for their family. Whereas if they stay remote, they don't take on that extra risk. So they potentially have something to gain and potentially something to lose. Prospective students are a stakeholder. So every year, students decide whether to go to school. They might decide, for the same reason as the current students, they might think, well, the quality of the experience is going to be lower. The instruction is not going to be as good. I'm not going to go. If there is a remote only environment at the school. So they might not go at all. They might go and the instruction might not be as good. They potentially stand to lose something if the university is remote only. Same as the current students, they could also potentially gain something if, like I said before, they're higher risk or their family is. Parents. So when I do this in class, students often forget to bring up parents, but many parents are financially supporting their kids, helping them go to school. Parents have a stake in this as well. If the instruction's not as good, maybe they'll feel that they're wasting their money. Maybe they're worried about sending their kid off for their first year of school in a suboptimal environment. But then also, the pandemic, if their kid decides to go to school, but it's remote, parents might be more likely to continue living with their kid. And that could be something that they're gaining or losing. If they love living with you, maybe that's a thing that they're gaining. If they were about ready for you to leave the house, then maybe they stand to lose something by remote instruction because you're still around. The CSU board is a stakeholder. So, I'm saying the CSU board, I really mean, the people making the major decisions at CSU, deciding whether we stay remote. And so, of course, they're a stakeholder. They're the ones responsible for making the decision. They stand to potentially lose here, though, because if they go fully remote and enrollment drops, which it did in the last year, it costs them money. And so that can be a major hardship for a school. that they, stand to potentially lose money, but they're a stakeholder that potentially stands to gain something. If they go remote or mostly remote and they can avoid outbreaks and make the school look responsible and protect the surrounding community, that looks good. So that might be something that improves their reputation. So they're a central stakeholder, but like many of the others on this list, they're a complex stakeholder. They potentially stand to gain and potentially stand to lose. You might not think that local businesses are a stakeholder here because they are not really involved in the decision, but they are a stakeholder because Fort Collins is a college town and the businesses here rely on the university in order to generate enough revenue to stay afloat. And so if we went fully remote and let's say 20,000, 30,000 fewer people arrived in the city, that's a lot fewer people who can go out and buy things at local businesses. And so if we went fully remote, they would likely stand to lose something from this. It would hurt their business. So they're a bit less complex maybe because their primary stake seems to be that they might lose something. Vulnerable Fort Collins residents, on the other hand, if we went fully remote, they probably stand mostly to gain because they're at higher risk of having serious complications from COVID. Students arriving and then going out into the city, it helps the businesses, but that's how COVID spreads. And so if you're a vulnerable resident of Fort Collins, if CSU goes remote, that's probably a good thing for you. You stand to gain. And so this, of course, is not a comprehensive list. We could go further and further away and find people with something to potentially gain or lose in this situation. And it is a good exercise to do that, but I definitely want you to be able to come up with a core list like this, the top several stakeholders. And we'll talk later about finding a stakeholder that not only has something major to gain or lose, but has some power. And different stakeholders are always going to have different amounts of power, and you don't necessarily have to pick for your audience the one with the most, but it's something to start thinking about. So again, I don't want you to try to come up with an audience right away because you don't even have a topic, and even once you do, you got to get into your research before you can really narrow down to a targeted stakeholder audience that you're going to use. But you do need to begin developing this skill. So on Idea Day next week and going forward, as you start thinking about what you want to write about and then doing your research, I want you to practice this. So think about a new issue, even if you see one on the news, think about who are the people involved and what do they stand to gain or lose. It can give you a lot of clarity and help you to think about the major parties involved, which you'll need to use as a skill once you start developing a thesis and picking an audience for your A2 paper.